find a real gain for workers, right? Where, frankly, maybe, let's go with another color. Let's just go with orange just for the heck of it. All right, just make a star there. All right, where probably, right, all of us have been teenagers at one point in time where we've worked those, we'll do anything for money, and we've worked those jobs, cut grass, pulled weeds. It's almost always lawn care, right? Clean mom or dad's car, remove snow, something like that, whatever. All right, whether we're doing it with our family or commercially, things like that, staying away from labor law, of course. The idea is that maybe, right, it's actually here, right? Maybe that equilibrium point is actually here, well below the minimum wage, well below whatever you would want to call it. It's probably the only group. Now, what it does, of course, is it does add some support for opponents to make the argument that one of the reasons you don't want a minimum wage is because it's going to attract teenagers to the work world. Frankly, folks, the teenage dropout rate of high school is very, very low. Most teenagers have some forms of support, be it their parents, guidance counselors, teachers, principals, that will remind them that when you when you go to school, to be careful, when you go to school, right, you're bettering yourself. You're investing in your own human capital to the point where you just be a much more productive employee later on and be able to make more money later on, right? So the idea is you're, sacrificing now, right? Opportunity cost, right? Because if you drop out of school, right, and you're making money, right, that's one thing, but if you stay in school, then you're giving up that money. That would be an opportunity cost. So if you really think about it, as soon as you hit age 16, there's some opportunity costs associated with your school attendance. Whereas below that, in most states, you can't work under the age of 16 unless you have a special permit anyway. Okay, so let's talk about the determinant of equilibrium and wages. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here because you really already see it. Okay, now with that said, all right, I'm going to spend a little bit of time. We're still going to use the graph that we have up here, just talking a little bit about what kind of creates that that equilibrium point. We're going to spend even more time with it in the next chapter. Here we're just kind of focusing on minimum wage. Now we would like to think, right, that government economists, especially at the federal level, spend a lot of time trying to determine what a good, fair minimum wage would be, right? Where should it be? Should it be here at point A? Should it be something lower? Should it be something higher? Something like that. We hope that that's the case, right? Okay, now, with that said, all right, equilibrium for wages across the board set by supply and demand, right? Forces of supply and demand. Okay, all right, so let's say, I'm going to kind of go into this graph, let's say this is the equilibrium point, and let's just say, kind of like we were mentioning here, for some reason they just got it right? That the minimum wage, right, is set at the equilibrium point, right? Well, anytime you go above that, right, well, you run the chance of running into a labor surplus and, the opponent's making the argument this is a tax and employers getting upset that they have to charge more and it might price them out. Okay, now what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about unions here, and then in the next chapter we're actually going to spend a little bit more time talking about them. Now, unions, right, workers that are unionized, right, they negotiate employment contracts with their employers, management, if you will, right? So labor, management, union, employer, what have you. Okay, and they negotiate. On average, wages for union workers are higher than for the non-union. Okay, so think about two sets of workers at two different employers, right? Same sector, let's say they're making glass, right? And company A, they're unionized, company B, they're not. Company A is probably paying their employees a little bit more than what they're making at B, okay? Now, that helps us kind of analyze things in the sense that, well, we would assume that a non-union plant is probably setting the equilibrium rate, and the union is probably above it. And again, in the overwhelming majority of circumstances, right, the union employees are going to be paid a little bit more. Okay. So that's one way to analyze it, one way to study it. But the other thing to keep in mind, right, is that when you've established the equilibrium rate at firm B, right, and firm A has basically gone above this, right, you do run the risk of a labor surplus, right? However, again, it's an artificial one in the sense that these workers are still going to be paid a little bit more. So the gap here, right, that should be a G, it kind of looks like a C. This gap here would essentially, right, be the gain that union employees would make, right? So let's say this is firm, this line here is firm here to be wage 1 is the plant, the workers at plant B. This is the workers at plant A. That gap would actually be enjoyed by the unions. So unions, when they negotiate a contract, it's very, very similar to what you see with a minimum wage. Okay, now let's talk about poverty policies. And again, this is one of the things that advocates will make the argument is that, well, we need a minimum wage law that basically addresses poverty, that lifts people out of poverty. Okay, and what I want to do is just kind of take a quick run through. We don't need this anymore. Some of these numbers, some of these figures, and see what you think. Okay, so just to go ahead and give you the federal poverty rates. Let's go with a little bit of blue here. Okay, so for a family of 4, all right, that's the poverty line for a family of 4. Now, most of us can look at that and say, oh my gosh, how in the world could anybody survive at that level? I mean, that's pretty tough pickings. All right, for one person, all right, so if you're on your own, this is your poverty line, all right? Family of 4, $28,290. Now, there is another level I'm going to give you, all right? And this is for a family, it's 39,040. What we call the Medicaid line. So that is to say, to be eligible for Medicaid, which is one of the most significant and frankly beneficial social programs we have for the poor. Basically, it pays for health care costs. This is it. So if you think about this question, right, here's the question we're looking at. Will a minimum wage really lift somebody out of poverty or a family out of poverty? The answer is no, right? So if you think about it, if you're making $7.25 an hour, all right, well, that's $14.5 a year. Whoops, let's just make that a year. All right. That's above the poverty line for an individual, but man, not much. And remember, a lot of this, we trust government economists. We trust that they'll make. Now, by the way, let me make something very, very clear. All right, the minimum wage law doesn't change often. It's so politically charged. But when it comes to dictating, poverty limits for certain benefits like free and reduced lunch, one of the most important things that we do in this country to alleviate poverty. I'm a huge believer of it, especially when I'm wearing the College of Education dean hat. Free and reduced lunch, one of the most important programs that we have, all right, to help with the effects of poverty. These numbers here are likely to change more often, but for an individual, that's not really much. For a family of 4, imagine, if you will, a married couple, right, with 2 children, right, a family of 4, kind of what the federal government would envision, if you will, for something like this. Okay, well, you double this, right, that's $29,000 a year, right? So again, 2 times $14,500, right? Double it. That's $29,000 a year. That's still not doing much, is it? It's just really not. Okay. So the idea is that this minimum wage maybe numerically gets you above poverty, but doesn't do much. Now, again, you're still south of the Medicaid net. And again, I think this is some of the most incredibly important stuff that we do as a policy. Now, getting back to reality in terms of what minimum wage laws do, what group they really protect. Again, low skill, no skill. All right, low skill, no skill workers, right? So when you think about the minimum wage, remember, this is a government policy. This is a social policy, right? This isn't the 11th commandment or the 614th commandment in my world, if you will, all right? Thou shalt have this minimum wage. These are social policies. These are government decisions that we make. They're political decisions, right? And I think they're incredibly important because it's the raw science of economics that really dictates, what we should do. And then, of course, politics determines whether we're going to do the right thing or not. All right, and of course, that mixes economics and politics. It's almost impossible to escape that kind of stuff. So anyway, so that finishes up essentially the minimum wage. And then when we get back, we will talk about wage discrimination. See you then.